So this is about Black Lives Matter. I know this is a very controversial topic for some folks, but it's something that I insist on talking about. And this article was talking about how these Black Lives Matter cases have made a difference and what changes that they've made. Now, there's some of them that I believe in, some of them that I don't support so much, but the idea that these changes have happened, let's talk about it. Let's see what goes on here. And so then with Jordan Edwards, I'm not going to talk about the cases, if you would, like what the all of that stuff. Feel free to Google all those things yourself in regards to all of this stuff. That's what you got your phones for, and the internet for. So make sure that happens, right? And so with Jordan Edwards, the officer, they will wind up being fired. Right, so this is a difference that happened, that they wound up being fired, but there were no criminal charges that were brought up in that particular case. And this is a 15-year-old boy, right? And so that's all the details I'll give you of that one. And so the police officer was fired, but there were no criminal charges. With Eric Gardner, he was the man who got the chokehold, and that started off the campaign of "I Can't Breathe" and stuff like that. And a grand jury, they decided not to indict the officer, even though there was like clear evidence, and even the coroner's report said a homicide happened, but they decided to not indict the officer. However, Eric Gardner's family received a $5.9 million settlement. Now, let me make this clear real quick. It's like some people's eyes get all big in regards to that settlement. Understand this: if I were to die, if I were to been killed by a police officer or whatnot, no amount of money is going to be able to replace me being a husband to my wife and me being a father to my kids, and whatnot. And so I really want you to take that with a grain of salt. I get it. $6 million sounds like a lot of money, but for real, that's a serious situation though. That might be compensation, but I would argue that's not necessarily justice, right? And so then with Freddie Gray, this is where it happened in Baltimore, and 6 of the police officers that were involved in this were indicted. 3 of them, though, were found not guilty, and the other 3, the DA wound up dropping those charges because he felt like he couldn't get a conviction. If he couldn't get a conviction on those first 3, then he felt like he couldn't get a conviction on those last 3, right? And so but again, the family received a $6.4 million settlement, which, right, it's like I said, it's compensation, not justice. Alton Sterling, this happened in Baton Rouge. There were no criminal charges set up against the police, against the police officer, but the mayor said that they were going to commit $2 million to body cameras. Now, I'm going to talk about that later on in my solutions, and so hold that thought about what I think about body cameras. Trayvon Martin, even though George Zimmerman was not a police officer, this gets put into the Black Lives Matter canon, if you would, and he was found not guilty, right? George Zimmerman was found not guilty, but later on, the chief of police wound up resigning because the community questioned why the police didn't arrest George Zimmerman right at the scene. Right, and so those are that's, I don't know if that's necessarily a change or not, but that's surely something that happened as a result of public outcry. And the last one I'm going to talk about, or no, Walter Scott. This is not the last one yet. Walter Scott, the police officer was fired. There was gross misconduct. However, the jury found him not guilty again, or I think this one was a mistrial. Yeah, no, this was a mistrial, so they couldn't agree as to whether he was guilty or not. And the big thing about this one, though, that later on in the federal court, they wanted to, or the federal prosecutors, they went after him, and he wound up pleading guilty in that particular case, which was really interesting. However, the thing that I'm upset about with this one is that this guy would have easily have got off if it wasn't for some random person walking in the park who happened to have their cell phone on them to videotape this thing, right? I mean, think about how easy it would have been to just believe in everything that was being said, or to not even believe all of it, but to not be able to. I mean, he already got off on the first one. What would have happened on the second one if there wasn't that videotape, right? At least that. And lastly is with Michael Brown, and this is the iconic one. This is the one that a lot of people would say started it all. Even though Trayvon Martin was first, Michael Brown is one that a lot of people were upset about, right? And again, a grand jury found out or decided not to indict the police officer involved. But this one was interesting because the Department of Justice actually pursued and investigated the Ferguson Police Department, and they found huge discrepancies and institutional racism and things like that. They found all of these patterns of racism, and one of the patterns that they found out was that black people were more likely to be written up and cited for minor offenses than white people were, right? And so then that really points to the idea that black bodies are policed way more severely than white bodies are. Right, and so think about that. But here's the deepest part. The deepest part was that the federal government actually had to sue Ferguson Police Department in order to force them to make the changes that were necessary in order to become a better police force. That should be upsetting to all of us, right? And so then here's three things that I can think of that'll help this situation. And they're all systematic, right? One is the implicit bias training, okay? That these implicit biases that we all have. Look, when you have implicit biases as a normal, average, everyday person, that probably isn't affecting people all too drastically. When you are a police officer with implicit biases, this is definitely can have some very real consequences in how you do your job. And so that's something that you're gonna hear me say that repeatedly throughout all these videos if you watch them. That implicit bias training, you have to train people to be aware of all of that stuff. The second thing I would say is body cameras. Now here's the deal, is that I'm not as strong of a believer of body cameras as I was before, because with Philando Castile, which the verdict in that just broke my heart. But even with the dash cam video and all of that stuff, that still wasn't enough to be able to convict the officer in that particular space. And so I'm not as strong of an advocate of this one anymore, but it's definitely a necessary step. And to have really strict policies on their usages and whatnot. And the last one, and I know this is going to sound weird because it just sounds like it's so out of place, but it's so real, but more compassion. But I don't just mean from the police officers to the community members that they serve, but I also mean from the community members to the police officers. Because look, this is something I've been able to figure out in my short lifetime here, is that the police officers do have a really hard job to do. And that's something, and doing that job is something that I need to respect as a person, as a citizen. And yet at the same time, I demand as a citizen that my police officers treat me as a human, treat this black body as a human being.